those in the public and those listening on the WebEx and virtual. Thank you so much for joining us today. Our first line of business would be just preliminary matters, call to order, and the notice that General Statute 13-8A-15 mandates that the chair inquire as to whether any member knows of any known conflict of interest or even appearance of conflict with the respect matters for the Environmental Management Commission and this committee, Water Quality Committee. If any member knows of a conflict of interest or appearance of conflict, please so state at this time. Committee members. Thank you. You have the minutes from the January meeting. Thanks for staff putting those together, and those are before you, so we'll entertain a motion that we approve those. Commissioner Yarborough moves that the minutes be approved. Second. Second. Commissioner Baumgartner, thank you. Any discussion on the minutes? All those approve, say aye. All those not in favor, same sign. Thank you. We'll move on to our first action item today. I request approval to proceed to the EMC. Sorry. Let me get to the next agenda instead of groundwater. I was getting ready to really confuse everyone. Thank you.
We'd go fast if we did that over.
Yeah, we would have. Thank you. Well, request approval to proceed to the EMC with proposed amendments to laboratory certification rule 15A NCAC 02H 0804 to add additional parameters. Beth Swanson.
Hello, thank
Hey,
you.
Beth. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Beth Swanson. I work with lab certification with the water sciences section. So currently our rule, it lists the parameters that can be certified by our section. And what we want to do is amend that 0804 B and D to add 2 additional parameters. Our rule is a mechanism that allows laboratories to be certified in order to supply data, but it does not require monitoring or reporting. So this is 0804B lists the inorganic parameters that can be certified by a program. That is the current list there. We want to add total nitrogen. It was specifically requested by the Ag Division. That's something that they often test and need to provide results for, but they're having to do multiple steps currently to add up the total nitrogen, and so they're requesting once the parameter to be added so they can do one easier test to get that number and for it to be certified. So we're requesting that total nitrogen be added to the list of inorganic parameters. You see in the red, number 29. And no other changes. And then in D, that is what lists the organic parameters that we are allowed to certify labs for. That's the current list. We've had throughout the years requests to have certified labs perform pharmaceutical pollutants. Some significant industrial users, SIUs, have that monitoring on their permit, but we did not have pharmaceutical pollutants in our parameter list, and so we are requesting that be added. As you can see, number 20. So that is what we're requesting the amendment for of 0804 B and D to add total nitrogen and pharmaceutical pollutants for to the list of certifiable parameters. And that's it. Any questions?
Any questions for Beth?
No question, just comments. Appreciate the fact that you're putting nitrogen in this way instead of Keldol. It is a part of the lab that I worked with for many years. It is a very significant piece. Those the samples that we're having to take before, we're using mercury and some other materials. So we had a lot of waste products there. It was very expensive as well with the acids that had to be done. So it's a good move. So we greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner Yarborough. Any other comments? Mr. Baumgartner?
Just curiosity, is total nitrogen a combination of the four other nitrogen compounds
So,
or?
yeah, it's basically you add ammonia, TKN, nitrate, and
So you
nitrate.
run those and then you make
And
the
they
it's
would add.
certification to make the total is what you're saying?
Right, because right now there's no specific method that says, yes, you can add all those together
Gotcha.
and call it certifiable data, even though in theory you can.
Understood.
But also that just means you're running 4 different tests, and this total nitrogen, they like this method a lot better.
Okay. One follow-up. Good.
Yes, sir.
Pharmaceutical compounds, what exactly is that?
So there's a list in the 40 CFR Part 136.3, and I, sorry, don't know it off the top of my head, but it's a list of very specific organic compounds that are often used in when the pharmaceutical companies were to make common pharmaceuticals.
It's like marker
Yeah.
compounds that you could test for to
Right.
identify. Okay.
Yeah, there is a very specific list of analytes.
Any other questions, comments? This is an action item, requires a motion. Second to
Chairman,
Commissioner Baumgartner.
I make a motion that we approve the Division of Water Resources request that water quality, excuse me. I make a motion that the Water Quality Committee approve to proceed to the EMC with proposed revisions to 15A NCAC 028 to include the parameters of pharmaceutical pollutants and total nitrogen.
Thank you. Commissioner Baumgartner, is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Yarborough, second. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Thank you. Thank you. Next item on the agenda, number 2. I've asked that it be listed as an action item today. Presentation of draft PFAS monitoring and minimization rule for industrial direct discharges and significant industrial users, SIUs. Julie is not here today, so let me get through this real quick. I want to set the table for those who are here and those who are listening online. This is a very complex subject, and we've been dealing with this for quite some time. But as you know, in September of last year, the Water Quality Committee directed the department to propose a draft rule and a draft RIA to establish monitoring for every industrial and NPDES permit and require PFAS reduction plans as part of every industrial and SIU municipal pretreatment program. That was in September. In November, the Water Quality Committee directed the department to develop a PFAS minimization initiative for major and minor industrial direct dischargers to surface water and for all SIUs that discharge to POTWs. The minimization initiative will require monitoring for PFAS and implementation of minimization activities required to eliminate or significantly reduce discharges of PFAS, PFOA, and Gen X over the next 3 to 5 years. That was in November. In January, the department presented the Water Quality Committee a concept for addressing PFAS, not a proposed rule. Whereas there were 3 phases to this concept: monitoring, establishing minimization plans for certain SIUs and industrial direct dischargers, and the implementation of source reduction strategies. The department's presentation was to respond to aspects of the concept and receive feedback from the Water Quality Committee to enable development of the draft rule and RIA. EMC Chair Solomon suggested it was time for the Water Quality Committee to get an expenditure minimization plan, expedite a minimization plan written into the draft rule ASAP, and that DEQ already has significant data to support such a plan. Discussion followed, and you'll see this in the minutes that you approved today in January's meeting. I'm just summarizing. Discussion followed about the process and time frame for creating a draft rule. Commissioner Derhake suggested DEQ return to the next meeting with draft language for a source reduction plan and a pretreatment program rule. Commissioner Baumgartner agreed. I called for a special meeting in February to expedite the process. A study group was organized by the department to engage the regulated community. I asked Vice Chair Ellison, Groundwater and Waste Management Chair Tim Baumgartner, and I be added to the invite list as they went through this process. All information needed from the stockholders were not available by February. Scheduled date and meeting was canceled. Today, Director Rogers and staff will identify those stakeholders who participated in the study group and how collectively created language for the draft rule before you today. Director Rogers, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Today, the department is presenting the Water Quality Committee a draft PFAS monitoring and minimization rule. As suggested, beginning the last week of January through the first 3 weeks of February, NCDEQ held a total of 8 stakeholder meetings with direct industry dischargers, indirect industry dischargers, such as significant industrial users. We met with the North Carolina Manufacturing Alliance, Pretreatment Consortium, the North Carolina Water Quality Association, Solid Waste Association of North Carolina chapter, and the National Waste and Recycling Association throughout this time period. The department, Commissioner King participated in those meetings as well. The department also hosted a call with community and environmental groups and received feedback from them as well. DWR staff and the department appreciate the engagement and the initial comments received from these stakeholders on the draft rule concept at the meetings and have received additional written feedback on the rule framework since our meetings in late January. At the direction of the committee chair, staff used the PFAS monitoring and minimization framework submitted by the North Carolina Water Quality Association to develop the draft rule before the committee today. The draft rule presents some of the input from the remaining stakeholders, but full scope of their written feedback has not been integrated in the rule that you have before you today. If the committee would like, we are willing to consider, would like to consider the rule that incorporates other stakeholder feedback. DEQ will be happy to revise the rule. As Commissioner Keene indicated, Julie Gribb is out. She is having to deal with some family matters, so she's not able to make it today. Karen Higgins will be providing an overview of the rule for you today. Thank you, Karen. Come up.
Good afternoon, Karen.
Afternoon.
Nope,
I don't think I have any.
you don't have a presentation. Okay.
Nope.
There we go. Do you want the rule off?
It's up to you all.
Y'all see the rule on the screen?
Say again?
You'll see the rule on the screen as we walk through. Is that the best thing?
That's not necessary, not unless there are specifics in what the committee members have. They would like to ask questions on. And it would, well, it would be, yeah, it would be good for the public to see it as well. I keep forgetting the virtual, my apologies.
Peter.
Yes.
I think so. So I am not Julie, so I will do my best to answer questions as they come up. So the rule is before you here and is attached. The first section has some definitions. So these are terms that are not already defined in the section 02H0900. And those are included to be specific to this rule only. The next section talks about the monitoring requirements. So those are cover all the monitoring, both the initial and the ongoing monitoring. It talks about what test method can be used, the different parameters, and what has to be certified and analyzed. The next section goes through the initial characterization monitoring. So it talks about what the control authority will notify SIUs when that initial monitoring is required, and talks about that quarterly sampling, submitting monitoring data, and then provides a couple additional options if there's historical sampling or an existing MPDS permit that can satisfy that initial characterization. The next section talks about the ongoing monitoring. So it includes the criteria that the control authority will use to determine who does the ongoing monitoring. And then it talks about, it's very similar to the initial monitoring as far as the control authority will notify the SIUs. The monitoring is twice a year instead of quarterly. And then it provides an off-ramp for discontinuing that ongoing monitoring. The next section talks about the minimization plan. So it talks about submitting a minimization plan to the control authority, providing regular monitoring, and again, an off-ramp to discontinue that annual reporting and updates. At the end, there is a provision, or excuse me, a paragraph that discusses the control authority reporting to the division. There's some language that talks about the control authority. The framework we had talked about the control authority, including specified IUs that are not SIUs. That language hasn't been fully worked out, so it's kind of a placeholder to acknowledge that we need to work through what they want there. And then at the very end are a couple provisions just clarifying that the rule doesn't supersede any other authority that the control authorities, the department, or the commission has. And that's sort of the very quick outline of the rule.
Any questions from committee members up to this? Commissioner Ellison?
Could you talk a little bit about control authority, which my understanding is in many or most cases would be the POTW, but for direct dischargers, it would be DEQ, correct?
So this rule is specific for SIUs under the pre-treatment program. There is a statement at the very end of the rule that talks about a similar rule will be developed for direct dischargers that would be under the control of, or under the authority of DEQ issuing those permits. So it'll look similar, but the authorities are different.
Why would we not put that in this rule?
So I don't know. The authorities for the programs are different. So this rule is in 2H0900. That rule will be very similar to this. And it will be, my understanding is in 02B, and I forget which section of rule, but they would be they're different authorities. So they're different parts of the administrative code, but they will be essentially mirror images of one another.
Okay, and has the department worked with your in-house counsel on the legality of all this? In terms of having the POTW, so they already have certain authority for pretreatment programs, right? Is this additional authority consonant with other authorities that they have been given either in statute or regulation?
I am not an attorney, but yes, it's not.
We regularly work with the staff to provide legal advice in-house to ensure that they're comfortable with the legality.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Twitty?
I'd like to ask a procedural question. What is the action that we're contemplating today? That's not defined in the information we were given, and I'm not clear on where we're going with this.
Be more specific, Commissioner Twitty.
Well, if the intent is to push a rule forward, I'm looking at a rule that has statements like insert language here. That's not a complete rule. So I'm curious what are we doing for action today?
My understanding from talking with the department is that when we initiated the September motion to come up with a draft rule, the department come up with a draft rule, then conversation with the department is in December, they already had about 80% of what the association, the Water Quality Association had put together. And they were to fill in the blanks, the department. And from the January meeting we had after that, the department informed me and Chairman Solomon and Vice Chair Ellison that they had 80% of the rule, a draft rule, and they wanted to move this forward. And I sort of responded like you responded the last meeting. We need to quit kicking this can down the road and do something. So that was where the February meeting came up. And we just did not have all the information that the department was to gather from the regulated community. So are there line items that you want the department to fill in, or do you feel like the association, the Water Quality Association and other stakeholders need to come back to the table?
I guess my overarching comment is I don't feel like this is a complete rule. I have quite a few comments on it. I know others do as well. We were already starting to get public comments in as well through email. So
Yep.
I don't feel like we're ready for prime time. But again, I'm not sure what the intent for the motion or the action today was. I would be willing to propose this be changed to an information item if I've got the power to do that.
No, we're not going to change it to an action item nor take it off the agenda. It's an action item to find a course
Okay.
to steer to get this out to public hearing, into rulemaking, and actually an RIA, a fiscal note that's so important to rulemaking and by statute. And it involves an economic impact analysis and many more items that has come up that will come out. And the way I understand it in the RIA. So with all of that, we do need to move something forward today. And that's why I suggested that we put it on or asked that it be put on the agenda as an action item. Commissioner Baumgartner and then Commissioner Herring. Okay.
One clarity that I think we can make to it is that we have been asking for a draft rule for a few months now. We now have a draft rule before us to pick apart, to provide input to the division on how we believe the rule with these bones should be crafted and moved forward. So if I may, Mr. Chairman, what I feel like the objective was today was to look at this draft rule and provide any feedback to the division so that we could then have a rule that was more solid or had all those pieces together by the May meeting with a regulatory impact analysis that then we could help move forward to the EMC.
To come back to this committee in the May meeting.
Back to this committee in May. That's my understanding, Mr. Chairman, if
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Commissioner Derrick.
I was going to make the same presumption, and I think we're on the same page now. This is not, when we say action here, it did not mean voting to take it to the EMC in May. It meant
That was never.
voting to bring it back in a better shape in May for this committee to
That was
consider.
never the intent.
Okay.
And it might have been speculative in the eyes of the beholder, but certainly when I got with the department, the RIA is important to this rule. And we've got to get it out in a fashion that we can move forward and get it to the MC so we can go out to public notice and have public hearings and have the hearing officer, and all of that, as you all know, takes place at the EMC level. But we're working it as a committee And those who want to respond and thinking that's something else, then they have a prerogative to do so. But this committee, I think, has been steadfast in getting it right. That's a good question. Yes, thank you.
So.
Thank you for your comment.
I mentioned this before the meeting, and I think it would be helpful in discussing it if we took it major paragraph by major paragraph. So I would like to suggest that we say, go through paragraph A and then call for comments on paragraph A, wrap up that, then we move on to paragraph B.
Specifics,
would
if
that
you would
work?
like to get in that as a committee member, yes, ma'am. I will allow that if the department is ready to, respond to those. And of course, when you do respond to those, I think it would be transparent to let us know that is it DEQ's response or is it the association, the Water Quality Association's information that they gave you of that 80% that the department said they had. So if you can make that distinguished as
We'll do our best with that. Also, I just want to know that, back to Commissioner Tweedy's question, is that we are looking for guidance and direction on how we should move forward. We've got a draft rule. I will note that there's a lot of comments out there, a lot of interest out there. If we start engaging further, may need more time to get it back to committee, right?
Sure.
But just want y'all to know that we are looking for that directive of how to move forward, what you'd like for us to do and what you'd like to see come forward in May. And we will work through I'll get Aaron up here and we can walk through the different sections and take your questions.
Go ahead, please, Commissioner Deerhake.
Well, thank you very much. I think before we dive into paragraph A, I would also like to say that at some point we need to look back at 900 through 922, the original pretreatment, because there may be some points, some minor details in those that need to capture what's being added to the rest of this section. So it's something to think about. Yeah.
Respectfully, not rehashing the past.
Right.
And pulling up that, and we have a time on this, but.
At some point,
As
and
a
maybe that we
courtesy.
could task the staff with going back, make sure everything's checked off. So what I would like to offer on paragraph A, which is the definitions.
I'm sorry, could you also use line numbers?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
And I will add that I spent a good deal of time last night going through and offering comments that I have in a tract form with line numbers of the file that you have up here on the screen. And I'd be happy to distribute those to you to help me with my talking points, if that would help. So I have them here for the committee members. I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of copies, but.
Please direct the questions to the department and let the department let us know, is it part of their draft or part of the?
Yes, and I also
that-
have a summary page of all of these comments that I have for each of the paragraphs. So just the highlights on paragraph A. I would like to ask the staff to consider a broader term, just for terminology's sake, instead of just saying minimization, referring to them as minimization and mitigation plans, because we are talking about a goal of eventually eliminating PFAS. So that's just a very general comment that I have. And that is where it is originally defined on line 10 of my handout, subparagraph 3A3. Another addition that I would like to include in the scope of the minimization and mitigation plan, if we go that way with that terminology, is the addition of the term best available technologies to have a more complete suite of tools available for designing a minimization plan. Technology needs to be considered in addition to best management practices.
Excuse me, just clarification from the chair. Are we discussing
He's taking
Commissioner Deerhake's points or is she just offering them?
given her the opportunity to submit her concerns with the draft for the department
Okay,
in reference to what the department and the regulated community has put forth in the overall reach of this draft rule for where we are right now.
so we're not discussing her comments.
I would like her to make
Okay.
those comments
I'll
relative to
complete
what
my
the-
suggestions for
I'm just-
paragraph A and then be glad to talk with you
I'm just trying
about
to
it. Yeah.
be
So-
clear.
So
Okay.
that's one suggestion. Under the current definition of best management practices, which is A3, and in my revised version B, I would encourage us, since we do not know what those best management practices are yet, to, rather than define them as we have here, encourage the staff to develop a document of best management practices that are considered high-performing and proven, so that the regulated community will know what practices are acceptable to the division and for compliance. And then the last suggestion I have in paragraph A, under the minimization plan, deals with what was originally subparagraph B. It's revised to C now that I've added best available technologies. But it just expands the scope of other approaches to reduce or eliminate pollutants. So in addition to identifying and eliminating pollutant sources or PFAS sources in raw materials, includes predicting processes or operations, generation of PFAS as a byproduct, because we have run into cases with these emerging chemicals where the emerging chemical is generated accidentally as a byproduct unbeknownst to the industry. And then also to look at minimizing the quantity of waste generation and product substitution to eliminate the introduction or generation of PFAS. Additional pieces of information that fall within the scope of other approaches to reduce or eliminate. It just gives you a more comprehensive understanding of the potential generations points that could occur in an SIU. And those are my suggestions for paragraph A.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So maybe somebody else would like to reply to that or have other suggestions on paragraph A.
Just one comment.
Go ahead, Commissioner Baumgartner.
So I agree with the best available technologies. The one thing that I, thinking about this initially, was a good path forward was to let the innovation occur with the industries on developing BMPs. Having a set BMP manual mind numbs people to think that's the only BMPs that can be done. I would like to make sure we encourage the innovation maybe to new BMPs, things that maybe the department and others haven't thought about, that industry come up with on their own to address some of these things. So that's just my one comment on the BMPs.
Commissioner Ellison.
Don't want to prolong this, but two comments. One, best available technologies has very strong connotations to treatment, and this is not a treatment rule. The other thing about the BMPs, the best management practices are already defined in many professional practice standards. They're probably, I'm sure, defined in rule in other places. And so I'm reluctant to mess with the definition of best management practices, which generally includes creativity for the potential polluter. And so, you know, for environmental people at industrial facilities are very familiar with best management practices with the standard definition. So that's.
Thank you, Commissioner Ellison. Commissioner Durick.
So coming back to best available technologies, if there's concern about that from an MPDES standpoint, perhaps a different term would be better. But here I'm also talking about technologies, not just housekeeping duties, but actual technologies that could be designed into the production process to, or even to reduce before it's discharged to the POTW. And that's something that the control authority has the right to ask for, I think, from an SIU, is to integrate any technologies that would reduce the discharge level. As for the BMPs, I certainly understand your point about innovation. I do think it would be valuable at some point, though, to have some performance reference for each of the BMPs and some consistency or standardization across the state so that the industries have some confidence in what they think that the state will find acceptable. Might be another way of phrasing it. Maybe the department could think of a better way of phrasing it.
Any other comments, questions? Any more information that committee members, do you want to move on with some other questions in another subchapter? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, well, thank you. Paragraph B deals with all PFAS monitoring outlined in the rule shall be conducted as follows. I wanted to make sure, and this maybe it's apparent to everyone else, but in paragraph 1A, I wanted to be sure that we're talking about, in the end, we use the latest version of test method 1633. I just wasn't certain that the language, the way it was phrased there, was the best. So I would appreciate it if the staff would go back and make sure that there's complete understanding by the regulated community that the final and most proven version of test method 1633 is being used. So that's just a clarification there. I do suggest that we consider in paragraph B1E that we focus only on grab samples, not composite samples. Compositing has a risk of diluting the concentration that you're trying to capture. I would be interested in knowing why there was a proposal for a composite sample that's equivalent or an alternative to grab sampling. That applies to paragraph 1 and paragraph 2.
Okay.
So what I've proposed in the handout I've given you strikes grab sampling. Excuse me, strikes composite sampling. Are there any members here that can help me understand why the composite is considered equivalent to grab as an option?
Well,
So the framework we were provided to work from said a representative grab sample or at the controls authority, a composite sample. So that's why that was included.
May I ask the division if they have an opinion about that based on their experience or the representativeness of samples, composite versus grab?
I'm Mike Montebello, the NPDS branch chief. So they're in 40 CFR 136, which is the final place where this method would eventually go. There are provisions for something called a grab composite. There are ways to take grab samples multiple times and put them together to come up with basically a grab composite. And that's consistent with the rule that's out there for any other parameter associated. So I think there is a provision that's available presently for that. Once the 40 CFR 136, once the method 1633, which is the test method, gets put into the rule.
thank you. Commissioner Ellison.
Are you done with paragraph B?
Yes.
Okay, I had a couple questions for the department on that. if I
Yes.
may. Line 31 of the rule, not your markup. it says monitoring for all PFAS listed in the 1633 method. How many PFAS is that?
I
40.
believe it's around 40.
What happened to monitoring and minimization for the 3 PFAS we've been talking about for 6-8 months?
So my understanding, the method is for all 40. And so to comply with the method, you run all 40.
Does that cost more than just running for the 3?
It's not.
Okay. And my other question about that, at the beginning of paragraph B, you talk about only using the test method 1633, which is not yet finalized and continues to evolve. One of the concerns of the pretreatment consortium is a lot of those folks have copious historical data using other methods. Some of them routinely use something called PFAST as a testing method. So some of the SIUs, in coordination with the pretreatment, with the members of the pretreatment consortium, have done enough testing to basically show they don't have a problem, or they had a problem and they worked on it or whatever. But it was a concern from the pretreatment consortium that those other methods in that historical data should count. So is that no longer allowed?
So I can answer half of that, and I may have to defer to others for the other half. But the framework we were provided to work off of had no provision for considering historical sampling. So that was something we added in. And the framework we were given talked about using EPA method 1633, the third draft, or more current version. So there was nothing in the framework we were given to work off of to consider other test methods. As far as a position on the other test methods, I will defer to someone else that can better answer about the other test methods.
Let me just take a breather for a second on that question and ask the department something in reference to what you just brought up. In reference to the POTWs to report all 40. That wasn't in our motion in September and in November. We addressed the ones that we want to approach as groundwater has. Now, my question there, you added that from the original of what was discussed in the stakeholder meeting. But this will be a good bit of work for each piece of data. I've noted some notes here. Data has to be reviewed and validated by the POTW members. There's some members at 55 SIUs. If those SIUs have to take influent and effluent samples quarterly for a year, that is 8 samples per SIU times 55 SIUs times 40 PFAS parameters, which equals approximately 18,000 pieces of data that have to be reported by one POTW. And again, that's why they got to the table early and suggested some of their recommendations, but the department added that. And you just said, Karen, that it'd be no extra cost. I don't know, it's outside of the framework of what this committee put together in September and again in November. I want to follow up with that though. It's targeted PFAS, PFOA, and PFOS and Gen X, which would only be 1,320 pieces of data. On a statewide basis for the 600 SIUs, the difference between reporting the 3 PFAS chemicals is 600 times 24, 3 effluent 4 times per year, for a total of 14,400 versus 192,000 pieces of data for all 40 PFAS parameters. So you struck there something that I had noted as well. So continue.
I was done, but now you got me going.
Okay.
But the other part of that is the department has told the committee that you don't have the infrastructure at present to manage all this data coming from the POTWs and or the SIUs and direct dischargers. So I didn't know it was that much data, but I know it's already not necessarily a problem, but a question the department will have to answer when this rule goes into effect. And Chair Keene just kind of defined the scope.
You know, Commissioner Commissioner Twitty and Commissioner Baumgartner.
I'll make sure I understand. So what I think I heard was that the test that's required delivers the information on about 40 parameters with no extra cost. So is what I'm hearing that we're only going to want them to report on 3 when they're going to get all this additional data because it's too much data to deal with? In the age of big data and AI and data processing, that seems a little
No,
suspect.
no. That's outside the framework of the motion that the committee made. We're tasked with those P4, PFOS, and Gen X.
Okay, so even though that data is readily provided with the sampling, that's not going to be considered.
No, that's speculative. Commissioner Ellison, and Commissioner Baumgartner.
I'm sorry, I was just going to suggest that if the SIU or the direct discharge or whoever wants to get that big fat report, that's okay. But this draft rule says all that data will get reported to the department. And that's a lot of data. If you have to do these reports, and one of the concerns raised in the stakeholder groups was, how do we minimize the reporting requirements? Because they already have massive reporting requirements. And if you add however many gazillion bits of data that Chair Keen calculated, it's an additional burden, and it's beyond the scope of the motion that was passed.
Commissioner Baumgartner, and then I'll let you follow up, Commissioner Twitty.
I was just going to suggest that maybe we add another line in the section B rule, other approved methodologies. And if 1633 does have some debate, as whether it's going to be approved, used or whatever, maybe other methodologies that, as Commissioner Ellison said, that other entities are using could be considered as well.
Made that note. Commissioner Twitty, follow up.
Yeah, I just,
And then Commissioner Solomon after that.
I guess it just seems to me like that's a waste. And I'm not quite understanding the burden I guess that would be a question. So what is that burden on the SIU and on the department for that additional data? And then also, this is over my head, but if we're only looking at those 3 compounds, what is the potential that there are other compounds in that list of 40 that could be problematic that would be missed? I have no idea on that because I'm not an expert on this stuff, but I would be interested if the department has somebody that could address that.
Sure. Yes, brief response to Commissioner Twitty's question. Brief.
To answer that question, if we're seeing those 3, then we could see other PFAS compounds that are detectable under method 1633. So those remaining 40, we have limited data from dischargers that we could provide to you. So of that data, how many we're seeing the 40 or so compounds. There are other PFAS that are not detectable under this method, but there are other EPA methods, but that have not been finalized.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner, I'll let you do a follow-up.
I'm just curious.
Commissioner Yarborough,
If you're
and then
going,
I want to follow up with Chairman Solomon.
it's just a question. If you're sampling 3 and now you're saying 40 different parameters, but there's no additional cost, how is that possible?
So the method runs all 40. So they would receive the full information from the 40 and then they would pull out and just submit the 3, but they would receive all 40 when they run the test method. That's
Is it gas
Commissioner Solomon?
chromatograph?
Let me go
Commissioner
back and on this
Chairman
issue, let's
Solomon.
remind where we were in the very beginning. There was potentially 40, there was 8 as indicators. This is an indicator program. This isn't the final treatment. Okay, when we looked at, does it be 8? Should it be 40? Should it be 3? We said 3. 2 of them have the most health effects and one of them documented, one of them has the biggest problem at Comores, right? We picked those 3 to start the program with. We didn't say we'd be locked into it forever. We did hear from the groundwater people in the report that once you mitigate for those first 2 legacies, you'll collect all the other ones too. And so we've said all along, we can collect that data if they want it and submit it. But the way they'll be judged on their minimization plans is on those three. Now, we may see other things as they collect data, and other data becomes available. There can be subsequent things to say, hey, you've got the big three, but now we need to add these other 6 to it. This isn't a one and only time at this. We are very early. We don't know all the health effects of PFAS. EPA doesn't know all the health effects of PFAS. And so this is just a sample and see where the worst cases are. Let me back up to the next point. What I asked the department to do in the very beginning was we don't want to create a rule from scratch. Monitoring and waste and minimization are common all over the country. They're common within this department. Bring us a couple examples. Tell us what you like, give us some choices, and we'll pick from them. The intent here was never to build this from ground up, to second guess what a BMP definition is. The department's putting BMPs and PFAS BMPs in their permits right now. So we're going to go back and question what's in the permits right now? No, I want to stay with what the standard is, what we've been using, what the department calls one of the 6 BMPs, I think 6 from EPA, and what the department's reference. We are not here to reinvent the wheel. We're here to screen, we're here to send the message and deliver the message that we need PFAS out of the state. If you're using PFAS, you're going to do all you can to eliminate it, period. And if you can't, we'll go to phase 2 and we'll figure out how to treat it. But this is the first phase with 1,000 entities to figure out where the worst players are. So it's a start. So we're going to go through and we're going to look at that. And 1633, if we want to collect 40, but we're only going to judge the program for the minimization on 3. That's what we all agreed on. Now, the department never brought us back any examples to use. They chose to build it from scratch. And after the February meeting, what they were instructed to do was, because they had no rules developed for us, was to use what the pretreatment organizations had developed themselves. I wish we had 3 to look from, 2 from the department and 1 from the pretreatment, but we don't have till July or September to wait on doing this. We need to get this through. And so what we said was, if you said it was 80% good, as Committee Chairman Keene said, then take their rule and modify it, but point out where the differences are. And we know where the differences are now, and this committee can debate those today. But it's not from lack of trying to use a standard. Final thing on sampling, composite and grab, we're reinventing from scratch. You're going to hear about 1,4-dioxane. The department has told us that they don't want any monitoring for 1,4-dioxane. They completely know where 1,4-dioxane is in the state is comprehensively. You'll hear that in the next action item. I don't know if that was based on grab samples or composite samples, but you die 1,000 cuts in this thing. If you used it over there, we'll use it over here too. And if you didn't over there, we won't over here. But we have done minimization plans and assessments for these types of chemicals, all kinds of chemicals throughout time. Did we use grab samples and did we use composite? If we did, stay with the standard. If we didn't, use whatever standard we had. But we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't want to debate every line item in this rule. We need to get it to public comment. That's the most important thing right now, is to get the extremes aren't going to necessarily love it. They'll say we don't go far enough or we went too far. Find something, get something in the middle out to the public and let the public give us comments. That's where we're going.
Thank you, Chairman
Enough said.
Solomon. Mr. Bumgarner. Thought you had a question. Commissioner Twitty, you had a follow-up.
I think I did it. I'm good.
Okay, just want to make sure we're covered.
Go back to Commissioner Deerhake.
Commissioner Deerhake.
One item that I did want to ask about explicitly, and I've proposed it as a new paragraph C, but it could be fit in anywhere, is I don't see anywhere that there is a list of the significant industrial users available once the control authority does its determination, its review. It seems like there needs to be a list available. And so I was just calling for that. But I'm also introducing the idea, and I'd like folks' feedback on this. Are there industrial users that do not meet the flow threshold for SIU that could still be potential actors in releasing PFAS to POTWs? And had offered the idea, and I think you have alluded to that at the very end of your, of the division's rule package here, something that's still to be developed. But I was just going to introduce the term designated industrial user, an industrial user that may not meet the definition from a flow threshold of SIU, but still is a user that is a potential concern or interest to the control authority in terms of managing PFAS coming into POTWs. So I offered that.
And Commissioner Deerhake, the
Yes, sir.
industrial, the POTWs want that too.
Okay,
They wanted at their discretion to add it because they can't figure out a problem.
right.
They want
So,
to add non-significant users. Now, the motion was significant industrial users, not all
Right.
industrial users. But there has been, but again, this is our rule, so we could put it out as SIUs, and if we get the comments back to include other people, we'll put that back in the rule if we need to.
but if we're working in committee, and if the committee members are in agreement to add a non-significant or a designated IU, could we not add it at this
We
point?
could put the flexibility in there. We sure could as a committee, because this is our rule. It's not the department's
Right.
rule. It's not
That's
anybody
right.
else's rule, but our rule.
That's right. So,
Commissioner Ellison.
Just to follow up on that, that was brought up by either the pretreatment or the POTW group. I don't remember which one. And they're very interested and they basically said, they'll start with the SIUs. And if they're not finding the balance, the mass balance, well, not really mass balance wasn't the phrase they used, but if the SIUs are not adding up, they know they have domestic sources, which POTWs with 0 industrial users often violate the standards proposed by the department a year ago. But the POTWs would like to then extend this. And it was discussed, it was reiterated that this is a start and there's nothing that prevents them from doing that in the future. And we would probably eventually have a superseding rule. I think Chair Solomon called this part 1 and wherever we go later, part 2. And that's where the POTWs would have enough data to say, our SIUs are not contributing as much as we're finding at the treatment plant. So it's got to be somebody else. And they know who some of those non-SIU dischargers are. So I don't want to say that that's covered, but I do want to say that it has been considered and it's understood.
well,
Yeah,
then
see,
can we be a little more explicit in here and give them the option of going ahead and incorporating those non-significant IUs in the scope of this rule package?
Well, I think in the scope, yes, and I will offer both obvious comments is that I had noted here that the department looked to see or seek to pull the non-SIUs into the program using undetermined criteria. So the DEQ, just the department needs to use the SIU language at this point, what they've submitted. I feel like that's.
If I may.
That's what our motion was, SIUs direct dischargers.
Yeah. And
Yes, yeah, then we use significant, but
and if I may,
Chair Solomon.
we got to do a regulatory impact analysis.
Yep.
The more complexity we build into this first version of the monitoring and rule, the harder it is. We know who the SIUs are. We know who the direct dischargers are. We don't quantify how many indirect or industrial dischargers that aren't SIUs around the state, and how do we put a cost on that? That gets very hard in this first phase. We, as Commissioner Ellison says, once we start doing this first phase and get the SIUs and directs in it, we can estimate that easy now, and then we can estimate again later if we want to add them into the rule. But we do have to do a physical analysis for this. So the more complexity we add, the harder that rule gets to do in the first phase.
And we're looking for an IRA, according to the department, to work expediently to get that done really quick. So that's our conversation with the department, is the physical note to come out and not take long. We're gonna get into 1.4 in a few minutes, and the department's got quite a bit to do as well. So to clutter this up, like Chairman Solomon just said, it could take longer than we want.
I think Karen was going to comment.
I was. So to be clear, the department did not add industrial users that are not SIUs to the rule. The framework we were given stated SIUs and selected IUs.
Okay.
So that's why that provision is in the rule. There was no criteria provided for how the control authority will select those IUs. So that is the language that's missing. So to get through rulemaking and to comply with the APA, we have to provide the criteria that a decision will be made. We don't know what that criteria is that the control authority wants. So that's why it was written as a placeholder, because we have not had those discussions to make those decisions. So if the commission wants just SIUs, we can remove that paragraph. But I want to be clear, we did not add that. That was in the framework we were told to work from.
All right. Okay. Any other comments?
So the next major paragraph
Commissioner
deals
Drake.
with characterization monitoring. And some of my comments are just wordsmithing, like terminology, initial versus baseline. But one of the other comments that I had as I was reviewing this dealt with the, let's see, paragraph 1. It says, halfway through it, it says the control authority shall specify in the notification where the control authority or SIU will be responsible for completing the monitoring. The control authority shall also notify any new SIU pre-treatment permit applicant. I think it's important for new applicants to be considered in this process too, that the PFAS characterization monitoring shall be required as described in C2. The permit applicant shall include a PFAS minimization and mitigation plan when the control authority deems appropriate. I think we need to be able to allow for new facilities coming into this mix and be prepared to have them do the similar minimization exercise. So that's what I was requiring there. On
We in C or D?
in the red line, I'm talking about D. In the red line strikeout, I'm talking about D. So I think the most significant comment I have under this this PFAS initial characterization monitoring is that would like to recommend that under 2A, that PFAS samples be collected monthly, not quarterly, at each influent and effluent for 1 calendar year. That's 12 collections for 1 calendar year instead of quarterly. I think this will give us a much better indication of what potential issues might be coming through with the discharges from the SIUs. That's the most significant comment that I have there under paragraph C. The other ones include with a sampling date, including a time of day that the sample is taken. I mean, we've learned through the 1,4-dioxane experience that monthly sampling is valuable as opposed to quarterly. You're just not capturing enough. And even time of day is important when you see surges or spikes coming out of a process. So those are why I've added that. Most of my other comments are about the term non-significant or designated IU, which y'all don't seem to be interested in today.
Thank you, Commissioner Duhake. Let's move forward, Commissioner Bumgarner.
Yeah, I'd just like to point out, I think the ongoing monitoring that's in here is kind of jumping the gun. This is an initial sweep of monitoring, as Chair Solomon said before, and then to try and develop a source water plan, jumping to requiring, at least 10% or greater of PFOA, PFAS as a condition to then do ongoing monitoring is something I think we need to remove.
I don't think that's in that paragraph. I'm talking
D?
about the baseline monitoring.
Oh, you're in C. Okay.
Mhm.
I thought you were in D.
No. I'm just recommending changing from quarterly monitoring for the baseline characterization to a monthly monitoring, having 12 data points instead of 4. Excuse me.
We want to move forward, and doing that, Commissioner Deerhake, I've afforded you certainly a lot of time with your mark throughs and your suggestions. The committee members might have some as well, but thank you for doing the work that you're doing and have that, but we need to move through this. And if other commissioners have comments, we need to direct those to committee members, but to the department as well, and move on. Commissioner Twitty.
I'll keep I didn't do as thorough a job as Commissioner Deerhake did. Mine are more general. I feel in general that the timeline seems a little long so could we, to this question to the department, could we, and to the commission, could we consider shortening some of those timelines? I think by the math I did, if everything went according to schedule, it would be 3+ years before the SIU that was discharging and was found to be discharging would have to actually do anything, take any action at all. And then the 10%, I think we differ on that one. I'm questioning if that's too much. Those are questions that, again, I'm over my head on the chemistry and the sampling and the science behind the data and what that supports. But my concern is this rule, if it's implemented, what we've got 1,000 SIUs or numerous hundreds, if the rule is implemented to a T, it does not require any of those SIUs to stop discharging PFAS. If they get to 8 or 9%, that they're still discharging, they're good. So I think that seems like a miss to me. So that's a question on the science and what can be accomplished. And maybe where we're trying to go with all this too, there's been a few comments about, well, this is a first step. This is the first step. This is to get something going. Well, what is the bigger vision for how this is going to be rolled out and how we're going to do this? I'm not clear on that. I'm concerned the public might not be.
If I may answer that,
Yep.
if you remember back in September, we made the motion, we would do these two things in parallel. This would be our start to get things classified, to understand who's got the problems, get them to do the best they can inside the fence line to get rid of them, and then us to take the action once we understand who that is. That's one path. The other motion that was made back in September was we would go meet with FDA on the food part of this, which we all had or most of us had objections to, and that we would try to resolve what the numeric standard should be. So we are still moving toward a numeric standard, and we haven't given up on that. But while we're doing this, and yeah, it may take a year or 2 years or 3 years, we're also going to be moving with the numeric standard. What we don't control in the numeric standard is the current federal regime right now, with where EPA is on it and where FDA is and where all the new people are. So while we can push that a little bit and keep pushing it, we got to do this, because this is the track we said we'd be on. They're not sequential. They're not at the exclusion of each other. We made the motion in September to do both, and we will do both at the same time.
Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Solomon. Commissioner Ellison. Let's wrap this up and move forward.
Just a couple questions about reduction requirements. Line 184, it's H. Nothing in this rule shall limit the control authority's authority to impose additional monitoring reduction requirements, et cetera. And the line 164 also mentions reduction goals. We weren't getting into the reduction business with this rule. So I'm questioning where that is and what authority do the POTWs have for imposing reduction requirements on SIUs for constituents that are not otherwise regulated by the state.
I'm looking at the pre-treatment people because they're going to do a much better job answering that than I am.
So this is Mike Montebello again. Just under the general pretreatment rules, there is something called local limits that is at the discretion of the control authority, which would be the POTW, and they are authorized to look at what for their own systems, what they need for their own operational issues which we may not know about. So there is provisions already that's built into the existing pretreatment rules, the federal pretreatment rules across the state, so that is an option that's always there for a POTW. They could set limits that are more restrictive, or they may have other reasons, maybe because of the way their treatment system is built, the construction, the type of treatment system they have might be sensitive to particular pollutants. That's something that's always their option.
Are there any POTWs in North Carolina that are currently regulating PFAS from the SIUs?
I do not know the answer. I would have to get back with you on that particular question.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Drake.
Thank you. I just have one more significant comment to make and request staff to maybe to respond with their view about this. And I'd like to know the committee members' opinion too. And that is in the trigger level of the approach to triggering whether a minimization plan is required. It is, I think it's paragraph, now it's probably paragraph E in what I sent you originally, paragraph D, where it refers to 10% change from influent to effluent triggering a minimization plan. Is that correct? Yes. I was going to suggest, and I feel strongly about this, that in addition to the 10% trigger, there could also be a trigger if the effluent from the POTW exceeds 10 parts per trillion. And I'll tell you why I do that. In some cases, it may be more advantageous to have a 10% trigger, but in others, it may be more advantageous to have a mass number or a concentration number. And if I recall correctly, was it Michigan that we were using as our model for this minimization approach? They used the 12 parts per trillion. That's gotten to be an older number now. And so we have seen presentations on anywhere from, I think, 2 to 12 or more, but I was recommending that we consider phrasing it so that it says 10% or the concentration in the effluent exceeds 10 parts per trillion. And I have it printed out in the tracked version I've handed out here. So I'd like to hear what the committee members' opinions are about that.
Well, if I might, certainly the subject matter did come up in the numeric standard process, and we did not go there. And putting a number to that percentage, certainly the department can bring back what they think, and maybe that's what they put here. But the department and the POTWs, SIUs, waste management, all of the above. Numeric standard right now, numbers is probably off the table.
This is not a numeric standard per se of the effluent concentration. It's just to trigger a waste minimization plan. And so do you have 100% of all the regulated communities on board with the 10% and not the concentration-based approach?
10% was not from the regulator, it was from the department.
Well,
It's not
10%.
from the department.
Well, I didn't see it come in from the SIUs. I know they're opposed to it. Their letter today said they're opposed to it.
It did not come from the department.
The pretreatment folks were opposed to it.
It
Commissioner
came from me.
If the 110% came from you,
Yeah.
well, the POTWs and the SIUs are opposed to it.
That's why we went and talked to them.
That's right.
But the problematic part of the 110% is if you got to test the influent, we know what the influent is for the most part from public water supply. And some of them are there. They're already testing the source water already. Some of them, not at the individual facility, but the 110% is what do you do on a non-detect? What's 110% of a non-detect? What's 100% of one versus 100% of, as Commissioner Drake says, of 100? It gets to be dicey there. And so you could even say if you got PFAS, one of those three, you got to have a waste minimization plan. It doesn't need to be a percentage. If they want to make the case later that the background is more than they're passing it through, let them make the case later. We don't have to go into this thing thinking about regulation and cleaning it up. We just need to figure out what's there first and let them explain why it's there.
If
That's
there were
one,
no.
that's one
pers-
approach.
It was an idea that
I know, I got you.
in going back and forth with the department, and this goes back to the January meeting.
Right.
So
Yeah, but it can
Thank
be
you.
debated. Y'all
Thank you,
debate
thank
it.
you.
So just
Finish
to,
up,
to
please.
respond to that, that's one reason I introduced the 10 parts per trillion. The regulated community needs to have some number to work with to determine whether or not they have to develop a waste minimization plan. And so that's
Good.
why I went back to the concentration in the effluent as an alternative. Perhaps the control authority could determine whether the 10% or the effluent concentration is most appropriate in a case-by-case situation. I don't know. But
Okay.
12 was what Michigan had. I suggest 10 because it's been a number of years since Michigan set that 12.
All right. Okay, let's move on. Commissioner Bob Gardner.
Was there another question? The only other question that I had or comment was, line 170, page 5 of 6. This suggests that the data would go into pretreatment annual report. Is there a timing issue that we're getting into if we require these to start within 120 days that it's going to push these entities to get the data into that report? Need to be some other threshold to give more time for them to get the data together?
Yeah, so the pretreatment report is something that already exists and is, something that we get. There's concern about setting 2 different reports coming in at 2 different times that both the POTWs and the staff have to keep track of. So it was added as an addendum. Routinely, we have things where the lab data hasn't come in yet, and the POTW just notes that in the report. And when they get the information, my understanding is they provide it to the division. So I don't think that if there is a lag with getting the information, I think they just let us know they're waiting for it, and then they submit it when they get it.
Okay, if you provide some clarity in the rule to that the requirement here says it has to be in the pretreatment annual report. If there's some timing issue to when this is issued and that report annually comes out, to make
Yeah.
sure there's enough time that they're not pushed to get the data,
Gotcha.
whatever, have to get another, okay from the department to be late with it, whatever. So that's clarified here.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could, I think we've had some very good discussion today in committee. And I feel like we've given some good feedback on the bones of this rule. I would like to make a motion to direct this DEQ staff to complete a draft of this PFAS rule with regulatory impact analysis to bring back to the Water Quality Committee for the May meeting.
Water Quality Committee
Yes, sir.
for May. Motion's on the floor. Is there a second?
May I ask a clarification?
Wait just a second. Let me get a second before we go into discussion. Does everyone understand the motion?
I-
Okay, Bill, Commissioner Yarborough seconded the motion. Now discussion.
Thank you. I wanted to get a clarification on the motion. Would it be possible for all of the comments that I've distributed to the committee members to be in the record that the division considers as they're looking at it, so they can respond to us, so that all of the committee members who are interested in understanding can get an official response from the division on those comments? I think we've heard some of them today.
Yeah.
I haven't been able to tell you everything that I have here today, but
Defer to the chair, but I think the motion was based on information we've had here. Any information available could go to the department.
including the
and
hard
including
copy.
that.
Thank
Oh,
you.
sure.
Thank you.
That's part of the day. It's all been recorded and viewed. So, and if you weren't able to get to everything, certainly
Thank you.
it's just part of the process, but the motion on the floor is to get the department. Go ahead and repeat that. And it was seconded by Commissioner Yarborough just to make sure
Yeah.
that everybody understands and the public understands the motion.
Based on discussions that we've had today and that the department complete the PFAS rule as we've discussed, and developed an associated regulatory impact analysis for review and approval by this committee in May 2025, Water Quality Committee.
Thank you. And seconded by Commissioner Yarborough. Any other discussion? Commissioner Twitty?
I would like to ask the department if they feel like they know what they're being charged to do, because I feel like they're in a bit of a no-win situation right here.
I feel like we do. I think the concern is we've gotten input, pages of input from folks we've met with. They have their position on where they want this to be. That is something about negotiating and trying to figure those issues out. So I think if we're going to go out and do a full engagement with regards to the comments we've got, it's going to put us in an incredibly bad position to meet the deadline that y'all want with the May rule. So I feel like that, if y'all want us to move forward with the committee comments and what we have here to come and work through that, and that's more reasonable. But just wanted to make sure everybody's aware that the going back out, right, starting to negotiate and carry on the conversation is going to be a lot more complicated and delay us in getting actually to the task and finishing up these draft rules.
All right, Commissioner Ellison?
I concur, and I would suggest that all those other comments that you don't need to go back out to the stakeholders that you've met with. They all have an opportunity during the public comment period.
Yes.
So the motion is for you to take the input the committee has provided today and work through it in this bones that Commissioner Baumgartner called it. And they're generally good bones. So, and you've heard some discussion. Some
Absolutely.
ideas were accepted and some are not. Okay. I withdraw the 10% idea. Okay. So to reiterate or to clarify, you can make that by the May meeting. Is that correct? With the draft RIA?
We will be able to, that's the task we've been given. And we'll
Okay.
do our dead level best. Yes.
Thank you.
And I would like to, in my part of the discussion, wrap my piece up is that in September, this committee made a motion to draft rule to get it started in September. The department said they had 80% in December of what they actually needed for a draft rule. So this motion is charging the department, come up with a draft rule for what you received today and bring it back to this committee in May. That's the motion on the floor. Any other discussion? All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you very much. It's been a good conversation for PFAS. Let's move on to the next action item. You have a presentation for, I would like to take 5 minutes, just a brief 5 minutes, and then come right back in 5 minutes.
Siri did that, I think. I didn't
You're gonna make me be in track.
That was cool.
Chair Keen, again,
Next.
Mike Bonabello.
Next item of business is number 3. It's an action item. Presentation of the management of 1.4 docks and discharges to surface water and pathways forward. Real quickly, less than a minute. Back in March of last year, Chairman Solomon, the triennial and 1.4 docks and 1.4 was mentioned within the department, what to do with it, to go with a triennial, not to go with it. It was this committee that brought that out. As we did that to do it independently of the triennial, then it becomes obvious that we need to regulate 1.4 in some fashion, even though the EPA does not have it regulated. So in the essence of time, I want Chairman Solomon, I've asked him to sort of kick this off of where we were, where we are now, and how we can move forward today.
Okay.
Chair Solomon.
Thank you, Chairman Keene. A couple bits of background. We've been going through 1-4 for a long time. It was part of the training review, as Commissioner Keene said. That was pulled out because we did not have the fiscal note for it. We did not have agreement on the numeric standard. We weren't even close to that, but it was pulled out. There's been some speculation to the public that the EMC directed the department to do it or didn't give the department good enough direction. We never pulled 1-4 off the table. We just said we didn't have the fiscal note, and we talked about that back in January. And in January, I charged the department to bring us a draft rule for 1-4 docks and for the same thing with monitoring and source minimization as we were doing PFAS. And this EMC, this committee of the EMC talked about with emerging contaminants where there's not clear federal direction on what the standards are, that this would be a good first step, and that what we do for emerging contaminants, if we brought them on, would be great to have the same template built to just do the same thing. Now, I've asked the department to go ahead and just take PFAS off the previous rule and put 1-4 docks and do a word search, put 1-4 docks in so you guys could visually see it. And they didn't want to do that. Okay, and they wanted to argue about, well, we got enough data, we don't want to do any monitoring because we know where all the problems is on 1-4. I still think, and you guys still said, anytime we do this, we should do monitoring first. We should do the source minimization. And then if we're an emerging compound and we don't have agreement on the standard, then we can decide what to do in the next phase about how to treat it and deal with it. We can do two things at one time, and we should be, and I hope we are still looking at what the standards should be for 1,4 dioxin from a numeric standard. But for this, to make sure we've got it quantified, I'm looking for a rule, just like the PFAS rule, for test for monitoring and source minimization. And I think we can all agree on that, some fashion or form of that, to take to the public to get their comments. If the department doesn't want to do any more monitoring, they can justify it between now and May, and we won't do any more monitoring for 1-4. We'll call it a day. If we want to do a trial project just in the Cape Fear Basin, we'll just do this in the Cape Fear Basin. But it is time to do something on 1,4 dioxin. It's not time to kick the can down the road as some people have accused us in the past. We haven't been. We've been waiting on data information, but we can take this next step now. So in May, what I'm hoping this committee can do, just like PFAS, is come out with a rule package that's ready for the EMC. So with that said, Mr. Chairman, you can turn it over to a presentation, and this will be a PowerPoint, I believe, today, not a rule.
Yes, sir. Have a short PowerPoint. Thank you.
Thank you.
Obviously, Julie, not Julie, but.
I'm not Julie. Yes, that's what I was going to say initially. I apologize.
The
Again,
presentation, yes.
Mike Montabella, NPS Branch Chief.
Thank you.
So the third unregulated contaminant monitoring rule, UCMR3, was performed from 2013 to 2015, and 1,4-dioxane was tested throughout the nation's public water supplies. Of the public water supplies tested, 6.9% showed 1,4-dioxane detections. For comparison, 50% of the public water supplies in the nation tested showed PFAS detections. North Carolina had the top 4 surface water detections in the country. As shown as this second slide, for detections greater than 0.35 in North Carolina was primarily in the Cape Fear Basin, with some in the Lumber and the Yadkin basins. The division initiated surface water ambient sampling for 1,4-dioxane throughout the state with the focus on the Cape Fear. And just to note, it should be noted for drinking water in the UCMR3, the reporting level was 0.07 micrograms per liter using EPA's drinking water method 522. So here's a surface water monitoring summary from 2017 through 2023. The top table 1 is the Cape Fear. The table 2 is all the other basins. 1,4-dioxane hotspots were immediately identified downstream of wastewater plants in Asheboro, Greensboro, and Reedsville. DWR started meeting with these POTWs to discuss ways to seek 1,4-dioxane reduction. In March of 2021, the EMC approved a special order of consent with the city of Greensboro to reduce concentrations of 1,4-dioxane in the TZ Osborne wastewater treatment plant. This effort was very successful, and Greensboro has significantly reduced 1,4-dioxane discharges in their wastewater. Ambient sampling continues throughout the state to this day. The particular charts show ambient samples collected from 2017 to 2023. The maximum values you see in the Cape Fear have been found directly to be associated with specific industrial users. For instance, the 900 microgram per liter sample identified in Haskett's Creek in 2023 was discharged from the Asheboro wastewater treatment plant due to an industry taking their 1,4-dioxane treatment system offline. As you can see, the division has performed sampling in the 13 other basins, showing mostly no detections for 1,4-dioxane. There was one remediation site in the Yadkin Basin discharging 1,4-dioxane, and they have taken that remediation well offline. Additionally, DWR's NPDS staff evaluate significant industrial users discharging the POTWs and direct industrial permittees based on EPA's toxic release inventory and standard industrial code SIC codes to try to determine which POTWs or industries are likely to discharge 1,4-dioxane. So from the TRI, there's identified and there's also published literature and technical documents associated with that. As a result, out of the 131 industrial permits reissued since 2022, and these were for major municipal, major industrial, and groundwater remediation projects, 47 were given monitoring requirements for 1,4-dioxane, and one was given a limit, which is currently on appeal. Some of the 131 had 1,4-dioxane sampling data, and we did reasonable potential analysis for that. And as confirmed by the ambient sampling, the few facilities requiring a permit limit are the ones with elevated levels in the Cape Fear. So presently, through December of 2024, there are 32 POTWs, 5 industrial, and 12 groundwater remediation projects that have monitoring requirements for 1,4-dioxane. Much work has been done, and it's these 6 POTWs that we are focused on because they are the only facilities that the division has determined so far require 1,4-dioxane limits. 3 have taken action, or their industrial users have taken action to reduce 1,4-dioxane. The other 3, the cities of Asheboro, High Point Eastside, and 1 industrial facility, Alpac Polyester, require additional action to reduce levels in order to protect downstream water supplies. Best management practices, BMPs, are not the sole recommended choice action for these facilities. As it is known that treatment at some of the specific industrial users is necessary and needs to be maintained in order to protect downstream water supplies. Also, the data for these 6 facilities, there's a link that's listed there. You can see the data that we've collected and information on those 6 particular facilities at that website location. So the pathways forward. That is our suggested, and these happen to be some of the oldest expired permits currently, except for Asheboro, which was issued and then appealed and is in litigation.
That's our presentation, Chair.
The department has heard from Chairman Solomon, and we've heard this presentation. And the committee here, we do have it as an action item, and to move it as we did the last item. Are there any comments or questions that committee members have in reference to 1.4 dioxin. Commissioner Deerhake.
Can I ask Chairman Solomon to describe again what he did at the beginning to explain why you think a rule is still appropriate, given that we're down to 3 facilities? Not necessarily appropriate, but this style of rule, a waste minimization rule. Wow.
Well, the short answer is I'm not sure we're down to this 3. I think the department thinks we're down to this 3, and I heard a little caveat in Mike Montebella's voice. I'm saying we were asked to do a statewide rule. And a statewide rule is not targeting 1, 2, or 3 facilities. A statewide rule is for everybody. We couldn't get consensus on that rule or have it to date. EPA's not got consensus on that data, but there was still a drive for a statewide approach. And so what I'm suggesting is to go back, or I think several people have suggested, that if 1,4-dioxane is a problem for the state, we make sure we've inventoried it appropriately and required all the industrial facilities inside their fence lines to do the appropriate treatment to get the 1,4-dioxane out before it starts. If it's not a statewide issue and it's just at 3 facilities, there's other means that the department can use to address those 3 facilities, I think. I'm trying to follow up, or at least I think the majority of the EMC is, with this push for a statewide rule. This would be the first step to make sure across the state, all 1,000 SIUs and direct dischargers are not the problem, and there's not 1,4-dioxane somewhere else. Now, I've not seen and studied all the department's data. And like I said in the previous presentation, we don't do composite, we don't do this, we're not sure about approved methods. I've not seen the 1,4-dioxane to know in my mind, and I don't think this EMC's seen it either, to know whether the standards we're using for PFAS data collection and data review are the same as we have used on 1.4. Maybe, maybe not. I'm not accusing any. I think we need to go through the monitoring plan to make sure we have a monitoring plan. And then we need to hold some of these industrial facilities to their BMPs, and certainly leaving their BMPs on inside their fence line should be part of a minimization plan. If they're not, they've violated their own minimization plan. So I think this rule gives us enough to really start arresting or stopping 1,4-dioxane at a statewide level now. Again, is it everything we need? Probably not, but it is a start, and it helps us at the statewide level really start getting all the 1,4-dioxane out of the state.
Yep.
That's my
Before no, I can't do that. Committee members, during discussion, I'm sorry, Charlie. Hold on one sec. Commissioner Ellison.
Well, I just wanted to point out that in the presentation, when this slide came up, he said so far, these 6 so far. So I think that's worth considering in light of Chair Solomon looking at statewide. That's all.
And a comment too is that considering newer science. And from what my understanding was that the 12-year-old US EPA 2013 model is being used, and looking at the newer science to base some of these numbers on.
We've been continuing to get ambient samples on through to current date. So,
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Commissioner Deerhake.
Carter.
Commissioner Carter, I
just have a comment.
respectfully.
There's a question on the floor about why there's a need for a dioxin rule. I mean, for dioxin rule. I just wanted to make the point to remind everybody, we got sued a year ago by Governor Cooper for not doing a dioxin rule. So apparently he and the administration certainly thought we were doing. That's my only point.
Respectfully, thank you, Commissioner Carter. But let's, thank you.
The minimization.
Commissioner Twitty.
Kind of back, well, it's kind of like I was with PFAS. I'm a little confused on whether we're talking about a monitoring plan or a monitoring and minimization. I get the monitoring side. We want to have a statewide rule and not miss any actors, but it seems like there's quite a bit of data to support that we know who some of the actors are that need to do some work. So are we going to postpone action on that while we do some more monitoring, or is this going to happen tangentially where we're doing the monitoring and we're going ahead and enacting minimization plans? And Is that going to be part of this rule as well?
This rule would be the monitoring and the minimization inside the fence line. Don't get it in the collection system. Don't get it in the POTW system. You as an industry like Allpack have to do everything you can to keep your numbers down and moving down. If you can't, you need to ask for additional help. Now, I'll remind this committee, the science is still not there to do 1,4-dioxane at scale. That's debatable too. So it's not just the level, but it's how do you treat 1,4-dioxane at scale? And so there are ways to do this, but the BMPs are a start. And I agree with Mike, they're probably not all of it, but there's also not a lot of technologies, different technologies at scale that make it affordable. And that's part of the collaboratories report last year. So, you know, it's PFAS may be more treatable in some ways at scale than 1,4-dioxane is.
Then
Follow up, Commissioner Twitty.
just one follow up. Then I would have the same comment I had on PFAS. If there's already data to support that there's a problem, let's don't stall for another year or two to gather more data to confirm there's a problem. If there's a problem known, let's go ahead and enforce the minimization.
Well, we are going to do minimization
Okay.
for both of them.
Okay.
We're going to do minimization inside the fence line. Those industries are going to have to do minimization.
Okay. I won't believe we'll go back to the other.
Commissioner Ellison.
I make a motion that the committee direct DEQ staff to complete the 1,4-dioxane rule as discussed today for monitoring and minimization plan and the associated regulatory impact analysis, and bring that to the committee at the May meeting for our approval to send to the EMC.
Motion's on the floor. Is there a second? Are you seconding, Commissioner Hake?
No, I was going to ask for a little bit more clarity about the motion, but if you want to look for a second first, that's okay.
I do. Is there a second on the motion?
Second.
Commissioner Baumgartner seconded. Now, any discussion on the motion? Commissioner Drake?
Is there a way that the division or department can approach a more strategic inventory of potential sources rather than a statewide monitoring program? Can it be more strategically looked at based on industrial categories or something?
That's a question for the department.
Yes, I think we can, and I would like to see if we couldn't focus on the sources known with regards to the monitoring minimization plan and move forward in that direction. And then we can also provide the committee the additional information from a monitoring, what we've done in monitoring, so that you'll be more comfortable with that moving forward. That would be the way I would think we would want to frame up a draft rule.
If you're asking me to look at me as chairman, I don't think anybody on the EMC has a thing of trying to cut back the cost and scope to get something going. I just caution there's another group of people that say we are going to be passing over certain people and assuming it's not a problem. And if it is a problem, we need to address it at a statewide level. So whatever the department comes back with your data and can show us the data and make us feel comfortable, because it will be our rule, not yours. But on the monitoring part, we do have to trust you. You know the monitoring data better than anybody to tell us what's right. So.
Any other comments? Commissioner Twitty?
Director Rogers, do you feel like you have enough direction? The department has enough direction to go back? Do you need additional direction?
I think we do, and especially if we can focus it on these three entities, I think we'll be able to move forward.
Any other comments, questions? Commissioner Baumgartner?
I think if the rule incorporates existing data, it kind of makes it easier to get the minimization plan. So
Yeah.
kind of fast forward a little bit more
Absolutely.
than what you're
Absolutely.
doing with PFAS.
Any other discussion? All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
And all those opposed, same sign. Unanimous. Thank you. That's all our action items today. We have one information item, and then we will finish up. The information item is,
That's me.
I'm sorry, we have two information items. Modernization, Session Law 2024-44, Section 5.1, modernized wastewater permitting to support environmentally sound economic development.
Just put the slide up. That's fine.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've attached the documents that I'll be referencing on the agenda, so y'all have access to that. We don't have a presentation, but just wanted to give an update on the implementation of Session Law 2024-44, Section 5.1. There are two portions of this section that we've been working on. The commission has been involved with the first part where it required the EMC and DWR to submit draft rules for low flow and no flow systems to EPA to get their approval on that. And so the Commission Chair and I submitted a letter July 31st with that information in it. The EPA responded in December. Both of those are attached to your information. Just a few points I want to note about the EPA letter that came through in their response. On December 20th, 2024, Region 4 provided their preliminary analysis of the draft concept rule that we present, the EMC and the department presented in their July 31st letter. EPA states in that letter, nothing in this letter should be considered approval of any aspect of the conceptual proposed rule. They go further on to make a few other comments as well. I'll mention a couple of those. If adopted, the rule would effect a substantial change to North Carolina's NPDES program and would not be effective for NPDES program purposes unless and until approved by EPA as a state program revision. The EPA also stated that the letter, this is our letter, states that the EPA letter states that the Clean Water Act required that all NPDES permits included effluent limits stringent enough to achieve all state water quality standards. The conceptual draft that was submitted sets forth default effluent limits that would be generally applicable, preempting the permit writer's ability to develop case-specific limits based on information about the proposed discharge. I will note that in the statute that it says that the EMC shall move forward with rulemaking when and after the EPA approves the draft rule. The second part of that provision states, working group. We've reported on the progress of the working group over the past several EMC meetings. The work group has met at least 5 different times. The charge there was to look at a general permit or a general NPDES permit for wastewater systems. Early on in the discussion with the work group, we discussed the size of the systems that we need to look at. It was determined that systems, domestic waste only, and smaller systems, less than 1 million, and we ended up looking at systems of 500,000 gallons per day or less as a general permit concept. Staff, the DEQ staff, presented a general permit, and we discussed a lot with the work group. In the end, I think the work group was a little having the limits were tighter than an individual permit limit may be because of the general permit, and having to limit the scope of the general permit really did make it difficult for them to support moving forward with the general permit. Going forward, we have submitted quarterly reports to the Environmental Review Commission. The third quarterly report just went in. A final report from this work group is pending and is supposed to be reported March 15th to the ERC. That's my report.
Clarifying comments, if we could, Mr. Chairman, because
Chairman Solomon?
agree with everything Director Rogers said. We did do this jointly, and we did get the letter in December or January. The study group was working. I was waiting to see, before I pursued much with the rules, what came back from that group, because it may have some things in modeling and other things that would impact the rule. I found out a few weeks ago that effort was not going in the right direction, or direction that was satisfactory, and to go back with the rules. Now, some of you guys were in the air meeting today, and Commissioner Smith, you were the one that said the General Assembly should be brief when we get letters back. And in this case, I did exactly that. So in February, I went to the General Assembly leadership that were behind this bill, showed them the EPA letter and said which way, based on the legislation and your desire, which way should we go? They said, we don't read it as a no. Clearly, they say in there, they're not going to rule on anything till you bring us a rule. So proceed on with the rule. So that's where I take from the session law and from the legislative leaders, we should start moving forward with the rule. That doesn't mean that any of us have to dislike it or like it. It's just what we have is we have a framework in the rule. This has been through twice through the legislature to their frustration, and they're saying move forward with a rule. So in May, hopefully we are starting to bring back the bones of a rule to address the minimization. And I think what we will do there is we've already submitted the concept rule to EPA. They've given us comments where they had concerns, and we'll ask the staff, hopefully the staff can try to fold some of that in to that rule so that this committee can look at it maybe in May, and then maybe by July or September, we'll have an RIA back for it and can proceed on to public comment. It's got a long way to go, but that's kind of where we're at. And I know Richard doesn't agree with me on that, but that's just, I think our charge as a rulemaking body to move forward. But I've done the homework, Commissioner Smith, as we wish the air quality group would have done, but we've
What I'm
done
hearing
that
is you
homework.
like for that to be on the agenda in May.
I'd like it to be on the agenda for May and hopefully get
As an
some kind of
action or information?
information. Information's fine because we still have to do an RA, but I think we need to look at what comes back from the department
Okay,
in May, and then we can have till July maybe to do the RA or something.
all right.
But let,
I will note, the concept rule we have, right? Do you want us to bring that back to the committee for discussion?
yes, and look at some of those comments we got back from EPA to say
Okay.
where their concerns would be and see if we could modify that concept rule up a little bit.
All right.
And I'll acknowledge we still got a long way to go, but
Yes.
we got to keep it moving.
Thank you.
Mr.
Okay,
Chairman,
the next item that we
One
need to
quick-
bring,
question about a missing document. So this isn't a substantive question. The materials indicate that the March 1st quarterly report from the working group was attached, but I don't believe it is.
okay,
So I just wondered if we could get that.
sure.
Okay.
Make note of that.
We'll-
and
we'll
send-
get that
Send that
posted.
to all committee members.
And I don't think I reviewed that till about a week ago, so he may have not had it when he did the package, so.
Sure. Okay, number 5, the last information item, flow rate study for schools and daycares. Karen Preston, NPDS Municipal Unit Supervisor, DWR.
Good afternoon. I'm going to present our flow rate study for schools and daycares, and Section 18.2 of Session Law 2023, House Bill 600 required the EMC to study whether to amend the flow rates established in the O2T rules for schools, charter schools, boarding schools, preschools, and daycare facilities, including all of those subsets there. In the January 2024 EMC meeting, it was outlined that between January and December 2024, we were to collect data from other states and public facilities on design flows, as well as actual North Carolina flow data from these facilities, and review and assemble the data and their comparisons. Until the effective date of the revised permanent rules required to adopt subsection D of the session law, we were to implement the dwelling wastewater design flow rate rule and the demonstration of future wastewater treatment plant capacity rules in the meantime. And then for those categories which did support adjustment of flow, use the existing provisions already allowed by the division outlined in the 2T rules. Some general findings and assumptions. DEQ reached out to 49 states inquiring about their design flow guidelines, and all 49 states did respond to us. And I'll go over some of the results that we got from that. States did not specify flows for charter schools or preschools specifically. 24 of the states that responded did not have design flow guidelines in their rules. However, they used best engineering practices, historical data, and other engineering manuals to determine their guidelines. And then 25 states had design flow guidelines for schools, daycares, and boarding schools specifically in their rules. States that did not identify flows, specifically with or without a gym, showers, or a cafeteria, were assumed without for the purposes of our data and comparisons. So you can see the data we collected here. This first row, the ranges are what we received from all 49 states put together and divided up on the type of establishment. And then the next row is the averages from those facilities. And then the last row is what we currently have in North Carolina's rules. And so you can see how we compare to the range and to the averages. It's a little bit better depicted on this graph. The green bars at the bottom are the low range of the end. The blue bars are the high range of the end. And then the blue line, that's the darker blue line that's going through, is the average. And then the teal lighter blue line is where North Carolina falls within range of all of the other states. So you can see we are above some of the higher end. In some places we're below, and then we kind of fall in the middle in some other places. During this time, 8 facilities have requested flow reduction from North Carolina, and the average flow reduction granted gallons per day was 15 and 9. Some were to daycare, some were to schools, and so that was 25 down to 15, and then 15 down to 9. Those are the ones we've already approved from 2009 to 2024. And then our last slide is our proposals for the design flows. These allow for reduction and allow for us to fall somewhere towards the lower range of those averages in the data we collected, and would be a reduction in all of those cases except for the boarding schools, which we had a very limited data set, and it was not feasible for us to suggest reduction at this time. So that is all of our information for today.
Any questions, comments? It was a good report.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments in reference to, let's just go around reports from committee members or comments from committee members, and then we'll do a director's comments.
Start with me.
Commissioner Yarber?
Let me get over here so I can see somebody instead of hiding behind
Yes,
this.
sir.
No, I appreciate the time. I hope that you'll give me a time.
Yes, sir.
I've been dealing with hurricane issues in the western North Carolina. And I've been doing this for close to 40 years with disaster across the state for a lot of reasons. I would want to ask, what would be, does the EMC have any jurisdiction at all or authority to help with permitting during an emergency? And what I'm bringing up is Director Rogers and his group came early on. We worked on a lot of different things trying to do the permitting. But in reality, it's an emergency. Why do we have to do this all the time? Every time there's a disaster, we wind up having new people, or we have to go look at for different reasons, or we have to come up with who does what. And almost inherently, every time we do this, it's the local people that's doing the regulating, or the counties, don't get the information from the top. So they assume we're building a 1 acre playground and use the permitting for all of that, but for all the other systems. And so they don't know what to sign off on. It's not fair to them to do it. They have families. So how are they going to sign off on something big like what I'm talking about? We have rules that's on top of rules, and everybody walks on top of these rules. Permitting is an unbelievable, regulations are unbelievable. We cannot do anything. It's kind of interesting, the Secretary of Ag early on with the U.S. Forest Service used the emergency NEPA rules to basically say that regulations are not effective in our forests. Well, that really helped a lot because they were able to do things that they can't, and for the emergency that was there. Now, they were still responsible for things. I'm not talking about getting away from anything, but I'm just asking, is there not a way that the state in its infinite wisdom could say, well, this is an emergency, it's been declared by the president, and we're going to sit there, it's a disaster, and we're going to all say this, and before you say any more, this is the other piece of it. We always say that we're going to hide the regulators, basically, for a period of time. I argue on the other side of it. I think if we didn't try to hide, we'd have people want to go to somebody and say, what's the right thing to do besides putting a traco in the river here and turning it toward my neighbor? To me, I think we would actually get people to contact us when we're having this, then rather than go run and hide and wait. Well, the regulators are going to be here in 3 months. We better do what we can right now. All I'm asking you is, does the EMC have any authority at all to be able to say, during an emergency that has been declared, can we do something to make this a more, and I am so proud of you. You brought your people up there. We worked on a lot of different things, but there's still, last week, there's still so many pieces to this that it's unbelievable.
Let me say something first. I'll take the heat off you as division director, but we did work with Richard and several division directors to do this, you and I, and we talked about like an SOP or a rule or something that we could activate, because we're learning the same lessons every time. And then this disaster passes and we don't do anything. So what I can do is I can work with the AG's office, I can work with the DEQ legal counsel under our general authorization to protect water and land, and see if we can, as an EMC, come up with a rule or something like that that we could activate during an emergency, where certain steps were laid out and certain things could be done. I think the governor has to trigger that and the federal people do, but once it's triggered, and that's what we've talked about, once it's triggered, how do the people down the line know their SOP and their boundaries? And I think working with the AG's office and DEQ office, I think we can figure something out. But I will pledge to you, it may take us a couple of meetings, but sometime in the summer, I'll have you an answer back on that.
And before you say that.
I'm not going to say anything.
Oh, okay.
Is that enough? Was that enough? Or?
But no, I don't mean that as a challenge.
Right.
Here's what, we've been trying to pull all this together. We still don't have any money, so we hadn't done anything except the locals, and we've done a lot of things wrong, but we've done things to try to get people back in their life. But now, 2 weeks ago, maybe it does longer than that now, I guess, about maybe 3 weeks, the Army Corps comes in right in the middle of the Swananoa River, right down through the middle of Asheville with their equipment, when we've been told we can't even move the rock. So somebody's got the authority to do something. I just like to figure out.
That's the Corps for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the Corps has a responsibility and they can work it down. And what was really interesting last week with the Corps, we'd always been told we can't take anything out of the river below the water line. That's not true in their position. We can't fill it.
Yeah.
We can take it out. Well, that's huge. Man, I'm telling you, that's the biggest thing it's ever been. But no, so I'm just telling you, everybody's got a different opinion of what a disaster response is. And I'd sure love to figure out a way before I die to have to do this one more time. I hope I don't ever see it again.
Well, we may frustrate you, but I will look into it again and ask the questions for you.
I appreciate it. I think it's part of water quality, but I think it's part of all of North Carolina. It will happen to y'all someday. Again, it's not, I've worked in every Blaine County and the disaster seems like.
And I bet they all look at you and say, you're on the EMC and you're the sole conservation agent. Why aren't you doing something about this, Bill? Don't they all say that to you every day?
You're exactly right. I'm tired.
Yeah, I bet they do.
And it does bother me that I can't help it.
They know where you live, don't they? Yeah, I know.
I've told some people in the feds, they keep saying, we're going to send you people. I don't care about your people. Send us the dadgum money. I got the people. That's all it is to it. All right, enough preaching. I just wanted to ask you if there was a possibility.
Can I just,
Commissioner Deerhate, Commissioner Deerhate.
Well, let her.
Wait a second. We get, these are comments from the committee members.
I know, but I
And
answered
then I
that.
can move.
Commissioner Smith may have something some of her time.
No.
About that.
No, I'll come back to non-committee. I'm gonna let the non-committee members speak after we finish. So Commissioner Deerhate, these are committee report remarks, please.
My suggestion, request is that when the draft rules are prepared for the North Carolina Register for PFAS and 1,4-dioxane, especially PFAS. I think it would be very helpful for the public and the regulated community if we can include a preamble that outlines the long-term plan for addressing PFAS. We've explained it some today. We've heard some of it today. That is, there's another rule coming for direct dischargers and et cetera. So I think, Mr. Chairman, if you could help the division prepare a preamble that expresses clearly what your vision is for the framework for reducing and eliminating PFAS from the environment in North Carolina, that would be great.
Not a problem. That's fine.
Thank you, Commissioner Deering. Commissioner Tim. Baumgartner.
I don't have any other comments.
Any comments? Commissioner Twitty?
I'm just thinking there's an aspect to this too, that's an opportunity that goes beyond just getting the permit allowances. There's the opportunity to do some of the things that are being done a lot better and look long-term. You know, I just saw some of the damage fairly recently myself, and you know, we're driving down the road. I do stream restoration, river restoration work, and we're seeing things like that's going to blow out the next storm because the person doing it didn't know what the consequences. And some of that's emergency action, and that I understand that. But then you see mountains of logs and debris that are getting chipped and buried and mulched. Just like, oh, that stuff could be used a quarter mile down there to fix that riverbank that's taking out that guy's field. Why is that being disposed of? So some things like that could be worked into this as well to really have an opportunity, not just to help people on the emergency action, but planning for the future and how to rebuild too.
I absolutely agree. Reason I think if, rather than trying to hide from emergency and saying the regulators aren't here, do what you can. I think we can actually have an opportunity to not be scared of when the government shows up. Try to help you.
We have as well, let's do director's report, please.
Were you coming back around, Mr. Chair?
I am.
Because I had my
I
response was actually to Chair Solomon and the discussion of emergency work, so it's probably more relevant at this point.
Well, I was just going to let the director speak, and then I was going to follow up with our two non-committee members here today. And Director Rogers, please.
Thank you. I have no further comments.
Thank you. Now, as a courtesy, I'd like to recognize Robin Smith, Commissioner Robin Smith, EMC Commissioner, and Commissioner Charlie Carter here today at the Horseshoe, and Commissioner Dugan. Yeah. Oh, hello. You got anything to say? You've heard enough from me today. But I would, yeah, before we let you, I'm sorry, my Vice Chairman, Mike Ellison. Okay, let's go ahead, Commissioner Smith.
So I was just going to add to the emergency discussion, and perhaps this is partly on behalf, maybe, of Director Rogers. On the permitting side, it gets really complicated really quickly because so many of these are federal permits that are being issued by the state by delegation from EPA or the Corps of Engineers. And so the Corps can do a lot of things on its own behalf that the state isn't necessarily authorized to do on behalf of the Corps or EPA under the federal delegation. And I think, and Commissioner Yarborough and I were talking about this earlier, we do end up, unfortunately, trying to reinvent the wheel in some cases every time there's a new emergency. It would be hugely helpful to have a more, God, I hate the word robust, but a more robust agreement with EPA and the Corps about how permitting can be handled in an emergency situation where we're dealing with delegated federal permitting programs, because it does happen over and over. There should be a way to streamline this, but it's going to require those federal agencies to sign off on that streamlining process. We cannot do that unilaterally at the EMC, but it is definitely worth trying to pursue some sort of framework for doing that. This state in particular, we have a natural disaster every year.
Yeah.
If it's not at the coast or it's in the mountains. It's a fire, it's a hurricane, whatever. So there needs to be a framework in place for doing that. So I totally agree with that, but the missing piece here are those federal authorities, because that's who we're acting on behalf of most of the time.
And it's interesting that they're the very ones that say that we can't, there are ways to get around those rules, the rules back to the state. We're in a hamster cage is what it
And,
amounts to.
and
a
that's what
different
needs
part
to
of
be nailed down in some sort of framework that has been agreed to with those agencies.
Somebody with guts
Absolutely.
enough to sign off on it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Commissioner Carter?
I don't know anything more than that.
Thank you, thank you. Commissioner Allison?
No, I'm good.
Okay. I'd like to thank everyone today for their patience and certainly the robust discussion. And we will stand adjourned. Thank you again.